Hey folks, welcome back. So today I finally got the this flash decelerator adapter. Typically will go onto the front of your barrel or the muzzle. In this case, it looks like it's actually an MP5 in that picture right there. Now it's really designed before it looks like the electronic or the AEG series. These of course are the gas blowbacks. That's all I really have. So we'll see if they work. Now, I think this looks a little goofy on the MP5. This looks more of like the kind of like the muzzle brake or the flash hider of something more of like an M4A1 series. But this is what it looks like. Let's see the back. I can't really read any of this. This wasn't too bad. This is only like 15 bucks, and this is supposed to be like the 14mm negative clockwise one. So let's take a look at this and open this up and see what's inside. Oh, actually, it has all the model that'll fit here. So actually, notice that the one model that's not listed on here is actually the M4A1. You got all the MP5s, the FAMAS, the M1A1. So not the M4, but no matter. I think it's a 14mm clockwise. That's pretty much the standard of all these guns, so it should be okay. Alright, so let's break this open and we'll see. Either way, we got both series here, and we're going to try to, it would go fine on this MP5 right here, but this is a WE, so we'll see. Now that I got all the staples removed from the sides, we can kind of slowly pull back the backing here. Excellent. I was afraid there were going to be no directions in here, so let's see here. For your records, in case y'all need to take a look at that. Let's see here. So with the different O-rings here, and let me back up for a second here. The reason why I got this is actually twofold. So originally, I was going to get let me pull it out here, get the regular Birdcage flash hider. This is actually a real steel one right here. But I wanted to use a Birdcage flash hider so that I can attach it to this gun here and kind of have that M733 combo like we talked about in the past. But instead of doing that, that's pretty standard. We all know what that would look like. And so instead of that, I wanted to get a 2-in-1. That's something that looked kind of close enough to a Birdcage flash hider, like this right here. But at the same time, we can serve as a double review and talk about how this actually works. And here it is today. So anyway, let's see here. Basically, this is what it would look like. The different reduction speeds right here. Can't read any of this, right? But visually, I kind of get the grasp of it. Here's the back. This actually looks like an M4 style barrel right there. And in fact, that's like the Birdcage flash hider that they're removing right there, as you can tell. So, actually it says right here M16, car 15. So I'm sure this will not be a problem. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll roll it on and we'll see what happens. Now, the first thing I found out, there was a problem with this. If you were going to do this, it doesn't fit because of the inner brass barrel right there sticking out. It's actually poking into the rubber stopper inside this flash suppressor or this muzzle device. So you really need to chop that down a little bit further in order to actually be able to screw that on. Mine is a different version, or already mine has been modified, but even if you had the original one, remember that barrel would be much longer and it would still impinge on it, so you have to make a modification. Of course, if you have the MP5, there's no inner brass barrel sticking out. It's just that front muzzle. You can just screw it right on, so. And a little struggle there, but it would screw right on and it would work just how it should be right there. Again, there's no small inner brass barrel poking at it. So it looks kind of funky, but there you have it. Now, I definitely tried to use that barrel extension that came with the WE to try to screw it on, because maybe that would kind of push it a little bit further. But when I cut my barrel a little bit, there was a little bit of burrs that were remaining, so I couldn't really attach it. But if it did, if I kind of worked a little bit harder, I would have attached something like this picture right here. which would have been pretty reasonable. I think eventually if I tried hard enough, it would have worked, but I think that's not as good. So the real solution is to do it like this. Basically, really cut down the barrel. So there you go. This is now like 9 inches. This has the inner barrel in it as well as the outer barrel. And as you can see now, the brass part isn't protruding from the outer barrel. And so now you can easily attach the muzzle device in front of the outer barrel, and it would work appropriately. Notice how it would look like on this system, how this is the upper. Looks pretty cool. It actually doesn't look that weird, right? It actually looks pretty neat, actually. Very close to some of those modern short barrel system. Again, no real system exists like this for the most part, or at least commonly exists without really special modifications. But it looks pretty awesome. Now, one thing I will want to point out just real quick is that notice how instantly recognizable that original flash hider it is, right? The XM177 is really distinguished mainly by that flash suppressor. As soon as you lose it, it looks like any other modern gun. Going back to it, look at that, it really just holds its own and really shows you what makes it so iconic. So that's a really awesome thing to point out. Now, before we get into the actual shooting test, just an FYI, having the muzzle device on does not really affect the sound or any of the gas exhaust signatures. It just kind of looked cool in this picture or in this video, but for the most part, no, didn't really has any sound attenuation at all. It's pretty much unnoticeable or indistinguishable from with or without it. Of course, it sure does look cool, and we'll talk about this clip in another time, along with the ballistics and all that stuff. But for now, just know that it fits on, and it sounds the same, and it works pretty well so far. Now, the construction of the muzzle device itself is actually, the outer shell of it essentially, is actually very good. Made of some strong, I think it's aluminum, but a very well-made and well-crafted product. The only part that I'm a little bit concerned about is actually the O-ring, or the rubber stopper itself, actually. That the part that actually makes contact with the rounds when they're fired. That does seem a little bit flimsy in the sense that it can wear down and break down after some use. And I'm concerned that as it's designed for something more around the 280s of the typical Marui AEGs, I don't know how it will stand up long term with the use of these higher powered gas blowbacks that I'm constantly using it in. So only time will tell, but we'll find out in a little bit later down the road. So let's going to try to work our way up in the testing. We'll start out with a lower FPS gun, such as this Glock right here, right? Around 300 FPS, maybe at 280, 300 FPS. I don't have any AEGs or anything that runs that 280 mark with the stock Marui. This is the closest I can get. Maybe I could do something with duster gas, but the variability you get from duster gas is already hard as enough to keep constant. So I'm going to just try to stick with this and see where we're going to go. And then we're going to work our way up to the MP5 and the M4 or the AR-15 platforms, okay? So let's see here. So fortunately, this still has the original stock barrel in it, and of course we know it has those threads in there. So this one turns in clockwise, I believe. Let's see here. Attach this. Oops. There we go. So clockwise it goes in, but the threads are counterclockwise. We'll start with the white spacer, and of course this time around we're gonna make sure we install this correctly. So again, this direction, and then attach it here. Just like that. So remember, that's the correct way, because the other way around, it wouldn't affect it with the different spacers. So this is the correct way to attach it so that the spacers actually make a difference. Okay. There we go. Not too tight, because I don't want to be able to have to struggle. Okay. So I'll still hold it. There we go. So that one's actually straight. All right. So now it's been gassed up, refilled. Just take a look a moment to look. Kind of looks kind of cool. Kind of reminds me of that like those John Wick henchmen guys with those. I think they had like those suppressed Glocks or something like that. Obviously, this is tiny, and I think the movie was a little bit longer, but still cooler than I thought actually. All right. Anyway. Now, for the sake of time, we're not going to make y'all sit through here and listen and watch me fire into this chronograph the entire time. That gets pretty boring. But basically, this is what I end up doing for each one of them, each one of the spacers colors, right, to detect the differences. Now, each time the mags were regassed, and then I also did a control where there weren't any muzzle device on top, and we were just firing to see how it shows. Now, and then we compared the results. Now, I did want to show how each of the muzzle devices are a little bit different, though. So, if you can see here, this is the white one, right? The flaps here are essentially completely closed if you look down the barrel like that, right? Meaning when the rounds are fired, it has to push through the full resistance of the flaps right there before the round can get out, right? And that way, as the gases build up in there, and I guess there's some dwell time in there, but then that's causing some resistance. But it's mainly the flaps that are causing that, I think, to reduce the FPS of the round. Now, as you go up to different colors, the spacers slowly get thinner and thinner. As they get thinner, right, the inner tube in the muzzle device actually slowly pushes the flap away, opens them up a little bit more. And I'll show you how each of the spacer causes a different opening in the flaps that causes essentially the FPS reduction to be a little bit less and less each time. So again, this is the blue one, which is going to be pushing a little bit more onto that rubber flap, and it's going to open up a little more, and I'm going to show you in a second how that looks like. And again, because it's more open, it's a little bit more noticeable here, but you'll see that it's kind of more open. But because of that, the rounds will fly through and there will be less resistance. In the initial dwell time, when the gas is basically flying out, it's not going to build up as much in the front to kind of cushion it, so to speak. So that was the blue spacer. Let's next move down to the red spacer, which again gets progressively thinner, right? So this is the red one. It's going to be thinner than the white and the blue one, because again it's thinner. It's going to push that tube further, or push that tube further into the rubber flap, and thus open it up again even larger. And makes, as you can see here, this is even less resistance than the previous two spacers. And finally, of course, we've got the thinnest spacer, which is yellow. So it's not red, it's actually yellow is the thinnest. And this actually causes the least amount of reduction because it's the smallest spacer. So it has the maximum push and basically the maximum amount of opening in the rubber stopper, as you can see here. Basically, almost not wide open, but pretty dang open. So that's the least resistance you're going to encounter when you're firing through it. And so you're expecting to have the least amount of FPS reduction when you're using it on this setting here. So here are the results. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything for this gun. Now it seems pretty hectic in this model right here, but as you can basically tell, the black line represents the baseline of it with no FPS reductions on, no muzzle device on it, and it runs anywhere in the 300s to the low 300s to 300 basically. Sometimes it dips a little bit lower, but that's within the variability of it. If you look at all the other spacers, whether it's the yellow, the red, blue, or the white one, right, they do bring it down, but not significantly, and there seems to be no pattern at all, right? Theoretically, the white one is supposed to bring it down by the most, but there doesn't seem to be any distinction in this case, since, as you can tell, it seems like it does the least. But that's only if we really analyze it very, very closely and see that that's the pattern, that there is no pattern. The reality is that it just doesn't seem to be working on this device. Whether it's there or not, sure, if it's there, it does reduce it a little bit, but it doesn't seem like it's responsible for a reliable reduction, that's for sure. And B, it doesn't seem like it's doing much in general in terms of the FPS reduction. I have a theory that, and this is just a theory, I don't know, because I was under suspicion that mainly it's the rubber itself that is causing the resistance when the rounds are leaving and causing the velocities to ultimately reduce. But I suspect that maybe there's also that dwell time, and what I mean by that dwell time is that time when the gases are leaving the barrel in front of the round, in front of the BB, and causing some buildup of gas pressure in the front of the muzzle before it pushes out of the flap. And I think that round, when the BB is traveling down the barrel, it hits that, buildup of air or gas in there, maybe potentially reduces it along with the flaps. As you open the flaps, right, there's less dwell time because basically there's less, you're holding the pressure in a lot less, and so maybe it's just flying straight out faster. So there's less resistance from an air pocket being formed. I don't know. That's just a theory. I'm guessing based on these diagrams from the manual. And so something like the G17, which is a very short barrel, it's like what, 3-4 inches. Maybe there just wasn't enough time for that gases to fill up or form that air pocket to dampen down or reduce the FPS of the BB as it leaves, and it's just the only resistance that it's encountering is from the flap itself. That's one theory. So basically, the dwell time isn't sufficient, and that's what results into basically negligible reduction in FPS, at least for this Glock. So to prove that, we're going to try to test it with a longer range rifle, since maybe that will be more effective. So next on deck to test this device and this theory, I have the the Src Mp5 here. I did it without the muzzle device as a control first and fired through the entire magazine using CO2 roughly around 68 degrees. It's still a little bit cold, but it's warm enough. And this is basically the trend you got. Again, the black line indicates the entire magazine capacity, which is about 47 or 50 rounds that you can get out of it. Again, ignore the valleys. Maybe those are kind of shots that were red in air, or they were hit the side of the chronograph when I'm firing it. So in general, you can see it kind of does around the 400s, the low 400s, and dips down a little bit towards maybe the 350 range the entire time. Now, I say the round weight was 0.2 to 0.23s because I actually had a mix-up with the two bags in my loading device, and so, but for the most part, it's hard to say, but there was a mix-up of that. But regardless, the FPS of using a 0.2 versus a 0.23 is only by 10 or so, and so it's not that dramatic, but I do want to point out that I totally forgot about that. So anyway, as you can see on the black line, as we mentioned, there are 400s, dips down to 350. Now we're starting to see some trend here, right? And that the barrel is longer. I was able to attach it, and I was able to get about a modest reduction with the yellow, which is as expected. Remember, we were expecting the least amount of reduction with the yellow. So it went to about the 400 range right there. So small reduction, not a whole lot. Next up, we had the blue muzzle device, which I forgot the red one, so I didn't do this one for some reason. But I had the blue one was next in line, and that offered a little bit more reduction. So it would bring it down from anywhere from the 400 range, the mid 400s, all the way down to the about 360 or so range right there, to 350. So pretty good reduction. And then the white one, a little bit less, but almost seems comparable to the blue one. But pretty good reduction to you're aiming about around 350 FPS from a 430 reduction roughly. The Src, I probably said the purple line right there, it says Src backwards, and basically I had installed the rubber stopper backwards. If you install it backwards, it will still work, and the manual says don't do it. But the biggest distinction is that you won't be able to fine-tune the settings regardless of the spacers. Basically, if you'll do it, you'll get the most reduction. In this case, it would run down to sub 350 and around like 320-ish. But remember, because if you put it backwards, no matter how you put the spacers in, you won't get more or less reduction. You'll just get one fixed reduction setting right there. So that's why they say don't do it that way. It won't damage it or anything like that. It just won't work. You won't be able to adjust it. So that was based on FPS reduction there. So that's a little bit more consistent. I know a lot of folks are interested in the joules, specifically with the Src version, because I know certain countries have import restrictions on to what is the maximum number of joules that a device can carry or can fire. So I've included here a graph of the same thing from I just imported over, but I recorded the joules when I was reporting this firing, and so I have here the reported joules. As you can see from the baseline, the Src fires around, without any muzzle device, that's the black line, again, ignore the valleys, around 1.6 joules or less, basically, and it starts trending down there. So on a fresh tank, 1.6, and peters down to about 1.2 joules before it runs out. The muzzle device will only bring it down to about 1.5, 1.4 joules. The blue one will bring it down to 1.2, 1. Maybe a little bit lower. And then same thing, the white device will bring it down a little bit lower. And then of course, to get to 1 joule or maybe a little bit less, you have to turn it backwards basically to get the maximum effect from it. But again, it seems that this isn't as consistent as I had anticipated, but there's still at least a trend now, and I'm sorry I forgot the red one here, but as you can imagine, if I had ran the red one, it would have been in between the blue one and the yellow one in terms of joules or FPS reduction. Again, in this case, it's mostly down to 0.2s though, and that's kind of how we can expect the trend to come down with on this one. Now this video is getting a little bit long now, so I want to try to like tamp this down a little bit. So we're just going to jump straight into the WE XM177, see how it performs with this Marui muzzle reduction device. Now, keep in mind, again, the Marui also shoots at a pretty high FPS. We're talking around 430. If you remember that one video we made earlier prior to and analyze that. But again, that was a little bit during warmer temperatures. Today it's a little bit colder when we shot this. So the baseline FPS is around like more like the 400s. So it's still kind of actually a significant reduction in FPS from the baseline. But anyway, we'll go forward and use the muzzle device. I didn't include the joules in this one, even though I did record it for future purposes, but you can kind of extrapolate based on the Src variant though. But anyway, as you can see here, these are the trends that you can get from the initial attempt. And my initial attempt with the WE actually was a little bit wacky. Because I was trying to simulate a real-world environment where what would happen because every shot you fire, right, the FPS is going to reduce. If you change magazines, it's going to reduce or increase again. And I think I've noticed that the more you fire with this rubber stopper, the more, I don't know, more gives it has, and so the less FPS reduction. And then of course, so a lot of factors are playing into an effect here. So when you put it together, it's hard to really get a consistent image here. But what you can see here is that baseline, for the most part, baseline is around the 400. Again, sometimes there are dips. There could be an error in FPS recording. When you see, this is not color coded correctly, but you'll get the point. In the green line, that's the yellow FPS marker, and it's again, it goes from about 400 to about 360, 370 reduction. Sometimes it's a bit higher. I'm not sure how to explain that. But again, that could just be a variable in me holding the magazine, trying to keep it warm in some regards. If you go down to the next line, which is the yellow line, which represents the blue muzzle, that one has a reduction of from 400 to about 350, which is pretty solid. That seemed to stay consistent. And then the next reduction is when you go down to the white muzzle, and you're going from about 400 to about 340-ish FPS on average. And again, of course, this still has the backward stopper when I did it by mistake, and it seems to bring it down to about roughly about 300, sub 300 almost. So that's like probably the most reduction you've got right there in this from this chart here. Now, because these FPS reductions in a real world setting is just way too variable, and I think when I did more research, it sounds like a lot of fields don't even allow you to use this device because of, probably for this reason, and because I guess a lot of folks can just cheat and then just take it off at the last minute or after the testing. So I think there's a couple reasons why people don't do this in reality. But I kind of want to see, just for fun, how would it be if it was a more consistent environment, just to give us a better understanding under ideal settings what it would be like. So I repeated the same test, but did it with a more consistent setting, a more consistent refill each time, just like how I did with the pistol. And this is kind of what I got. And from what you can tell here, the setting on this setting is a little bit more consistent. As you can see here in the purple line, I got the color coding correct this time. The purple setting right here is the baseline with no muzzle device. Levels around like 400 FPS, pretty straightforward. And by the way, I shot very consistently in this setting, like one every minute or so, just to make sure the FPS was the gases weren't dropping too quickly. And then we'll start off with the yellow again with least expected amount of reduction, almost 0 in this case, looks like. So it stayed pretty much high. So then next you switch to the red one, which offers a little bit more reduction, so it goes almost down to 350, slightly higher, maybe 360, 370, around that range. It's variable, but I would say around the 360s range on average based on what we're seeing here. So about a 40 FPS reduction. Next up, we got the blue one, as you can see by the blue line. A couple flukes here and there, but again, the pattern holds true where it's slightly less than the red one, which is what we're expected, and again, less than the more FPS reduction than the red one, and more FPS reduction than the yellow, which is exactly what we're expecting. And then finally, of course, the white one, as represented by that gray line right there, brings it down to sub 350, so around that 340-ish range, 345. So what we're really seeing here is that in a more consistent test, like as of this one here, we can see a reduction of basically a maximum reduction to about 345. So that's quite a bit of reduction, but I think the biggest thing is that it lacks consistency, because this could be as variable when you're changing the magazine. Right, you're going to get a new fresh mag, it's going to be topped off, the gas is going to be higher, that magazine might have been closer to your body, so it might be warmer. As you start firing, the gases will get cooler, and then so your reduction is going to be a little bit different, and then the flaps being different, I don't know. So there's a lot of inconsistency, so there's just too much variability. So this probably isn't the best device to use to regulate your gas velocity when you're firing on a field, and for practical reasons and for, I guess, the actual rule reasons, they won't let you anyway. But this is kind of fun to look at. Now, I stress this whole concept about how it's variable, and I'm not a huge fan of that because of how variable it is. And this could just be because I'm firing, again, out of a much higher velocity gas gun, right? These originally were designed for the TM series, where they're like around like the 270, 280 FPS for those AEGs. And when I searched around before buying this, the reviews, different people have reported different FPS reductions. Now these were in meters per second from this one reviewer right here, and I'm doing it in feet per second. But if you do the conversion, the white one was able to reduce it up to close to, that's 130 something feet per second. And we didn't get anything close to that. Maybe the closest I got was maybe around like 70, 80 FPS reduction. But either way, I never really was able to accomplish that full 40 to 40 to 50% FPS reduction. There was a reduction, and this pattern is still consistent, though, of course, as being the white being the most, blue being second last, then red, then yellow, and that part's consistent. But to sell it as how it's advertised, the 40 to 50% might be tough, especially if you're buying this with the intention of trying to reduce the FPS or the velocity closer to what your field is recommending, or what you think might be acceptable in your region. So not to say that this review is inaccurate or anything like that. It's just that it's just hard to replicate it completely, and in our case, right, it's completely a different system and completely different FPS. But either way, I would have to say that, I think this is a reasonable product. I think the build quality is good, but I probably don't really recommend it. I mainly just use it as kind of like a muzzle device for my M733 kind of build. For the first time ever, I'm not really recommending a Marui product for its intended use, and this is just a reliability standpoint I have it. If it were more reliable and more consistent in terms of its FPS reduction, I think I would have a different feeling and summary on it, but because of the way it's set up and the way it performs, I don't know. I mean, good thing it's only $15, but that's kind of my 2 cents on it right now. Plus, I don't know how long that rubber stopping device is going to last after the long run. I've only fired about maybe 300-400 rounds through it, so I can imagine it's going to get a lot damage after further firing. But what can I say? $15. Anyway, hope you all found that helpful. Thanks a lot, guys. See y'all next time.